Today, we're talking about the full experience and blending tools and strategies. And we're expecting less educators to join us today only because many have already gone back to school. And those of you who are joining, we're happy to have you here. And today, for the most part, we really want to focus on your individual needs and the struggles that you may be facing right up until the start date of your classes. So please chime in, engage us as you usually do. Say hello in the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Again, my name is Dennis. I've been a teacher for Kaplan for over 14 years now, mostly teaching in the virtual space. And of course, we have Chris Murner, who is our Director of Learning Science, and Chris Ryan, our Director of Strategies. So, really, I'm, in my mind, as I was telling my two compadres here before the call started, this is a culmination of a lot of work we've done over the past few months to try to support all of you. In my mind, it was like, an Avengers Endgame where everything comes together and it all makes sense. But in reality, it's probably going to feel at times more like one of those boring recap filler episodes in one of your favorite TV shows. So don't let it become that, right? Let us know what's relevant. Let us know what you care about, and don't let me talk too long. But Chris Murner, any words to start us off with? Any thoughts as we talk about the full experience?
Yeah, I think we've talked a little bit about each of the different, the different ingredients that come together to make up this, the whole experience. And now it's about kind of the blend and how do you choose which instrument. In our blog, we talked about this fantastic orchestra analogy. What are you going to feature, and what does featuring that instrument bring to the table that featuring something else wouldn't? So when do you use asynchronous sessions so that students don't just tune in and expect the same thing? And how do you keep it fresh? And how do you leverage Zoom and the other platforms that you have? How do you be sure that you're sending them on tasks that they can complete and feel successful? And how do you, again, always controlling to reach those students that are less engaged than they should be for a variety of reasons? How can we help kind of ensure that we're trying to close that gap as we move forward? So I'm really excited to hear from everybody. I know everybody's, if they're not teaching now, they will be soon, and they've been actively preparing. Summer was unreasonably short this year, as it never really left our minds, right? What's fall going to look like? What do we have to do? How's it going to be different? And I think, there's still last minute changes being enforced here and there, and schools that are sending kids home. And it is still a crazy, wild ride.
Let us help you close that gap. That's a great point, and let us know how we can support you. Chris Ryan, thoughts on today?
Yeah. My 6-year-old son started a new school last week. He's a first grader. And, the very first day, internet crashes all over the place. And then we had the Zoom outage earlier. And, there's no plan survives contact with the initial enemy, or as Mike Tyson put it, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. I feel like we've all gotten kind of punched in the mouth over this past period of time. The summer was hopefully some time to reflect and build a plan. And then there's that nervousness as we get into school and actually get into the thing. And it's, as you said, Chris, where things are still changing. I think we kind of got to get through this initial jump in the water, and then we're swimming. And then we're like, oh yeah, there's this moment, this victory, etc. So this is almost the worst of it.
Yeah, I love your analogies, and the swimming makes a lot of sense, very appropriate, especially as I'll talk about kind of recapping what we've done so far. But as you'll see in the results, most of you here are from the college university space, where it makes sense. And it sounds, and we're happy to have you here. Please, again, let us know we can support. Usually we have well over 100 attendees live. And again, today we ran this knowing that we'd have less attendees live and more folks will be watching via video. If you are watching this after fact, hello. It's great to see you as always. But right now in the room, we have only about 20, right? So if you have individual scenarios that you'd love for us to cover, we will be more than happy to cover them. If you don't feel like typing in the public chat, you can type in the Q&A as well, so that we can keep your concerns or your situations anonymous, okay? But in lieu of that, I'd like to, take a step back and, talk about March 12th, when we started with our very first post about making human connections. And, we highlighted a few of the features that really bring online to life, a way to reach your students without pressuring them, without having to have them speak in front of the entire class, a way to get their insights. We talked about polling, private chatting, and then teaming up, allowing students to connect virtually in a way that may be difficult to do in an in-person space regardless of the situation. Do you remember that post, Chris? Either of you? That was a long time ago.
Yeah, I do. Actually, March 12th was my husband's birthday. And I remember we were, that was just at the height of everything where kids were getting sent home from school. And we were bringing my daughter home from Georgia on a plane. And the only kids, or the only people at the airport were college kids. It was bananas. I travel a lot for work and I had never seen that. It was just such a surreal time. I know still is, but we've adjusted somewhat, right? Like when you see footage on TV with people without masks on, you're like, wait, where's your mask, right? Like we've adjusted pretty quickly to this kind of odd state. But no, I do remember that, Dennis, and I think you jumped in first because I think as we pivoted to teaching synchronous online, where people were using Zoom and other tools like it. All of a sudden there was a whole new way of how do you get engagement and how are you ensuring that your students are actually learning something, and how do you manage the technology and still get education across when you haven't spent a lot of time learning about it. We talked about prioritizing Maslow over Bloom, where we really looked at the kids and how they were adjusting to this scenario, to your learners, and then also how you were able to prioritize that while also trying to get content across, while keeping all of the balls in the air. And I don't know that that's really changed very much, frankly, in this fall scenario, but hopefully with a little more experience under our belt, people are feeling slightly more confident that at least I now know how to use the tools and I know what I'm kind of up against. I'm just trying to make it better than it was. Whereas at the spring, it was everybody in the deep end and just figure it out, which had to be just, and as we witnessed, was just crazy for everybody.
Yeah, and Chris Ryan, that's why I brought up the swimming, right? Because I remember that very webinar, we invited folks onto our leaky boat. Those are your words. Again, just
I
don't want to
I
spend
think it
too
was
much
Chris
time
Murner had the leaky boat analogy first. I want to give credit where it is due. So like I have my own share of analogies, but I just want to say, but yes, we were all in a leaky boat suddenly, very, very suddenly. And no one knew how long it was going to go. And we still kind of don't, right? We still don't know, but we've also shown with just like time under our belts, like there's a way to get through and forward. But then, boy, thinking back on March, it seems like looking through a telescope the wrong way, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And then we pushed ahead and we had a post about rapport building, right? And as we think about the fall, I'm highlighting these things to see if you've checked them off in some sense in terms of your own planning. Looking for ways to share information about students, maybe with other teachers, or really just doing some teamwork to be able to reach certain segmentations of students. Relating warmly to the camera was something we talked about. We also talked about engaging students in encouraging each other, kind of creating the right kind of environment to help students feel like that they can participate. And then we had an entire post about getting students to participate, getting everyone on camera, icebreakers, monitoring nonverbal communication, tracking student engagement. What works in person usually works online. And did these bring some thoughts back to mind? What are some of the major things that folks should be thinking about as they go to the fall and are looking at it? Oh, it sounds like we didn't have chat open earlier. So Susan, I knew it's something be wrong if you were not here. Susan, it's great to see you again, and everyone else as always. But it's
and that was not an Easter egg on our part. Like what we're gonna do to make everyone feel better is mess something up. So then it's like, hey, these folks who are like, they think they're so together, and like, no, that was authentic. That was live theater. We are all doing it, and we just power through with a smile.
Yeah.
Dennis, I'm going to pitch that right around back at you, though. When we're talking about relating warmly to the camera and being sure that students are know that you're vested in them, I think you do a phenomenal job at that. And I think recapping kind of your best tips would be a really smart thing to do, because it's been a while, right? And so now re-engaging with students who now are also a little savvier, right, on how to handle the online classroom. How do you pick it up and how do you make it better this year than it was in the spring so it feels different and special and intentional?
I think savvy is the key word here when it comes to students, right? Your students know what's going on. They're not, they know, they've been through it the same way you have. And I think, I think a lot of instructors don't realize just the difference in terms of how you need to present when you're in a classroom versus in front of a camera. It's just, I think, Chris Ryan, you mentioned a few times, it's like, it's weird when you're actually only a few inches away from your student's face in terms of physical space, right? And you have to talk in this little bitty black lens. And it's just like, it's this weird feeling that, sometimes it can be difficult to adjust. But I have to believe now that you've gone through it, you're starting to get more comfortable. It's not going to happen overnight, but be real. I mean, that's got to be my number one thing for you, which is don't try to present in a way that you've maybe seen on TV or seen some other instructor or an actor playing an instructor on TV present or someone in an infomercial or whatever the case is. You have to bring your own flavor into it. You have to be in a space where you're comfortable, because ultimately it's your own passion for teaching. It's your own desire to help these students that will come through. And so I want you to feel that. I want you to believe that and understand that and know there is no right way to do this. At the end of the day, the right way to do this is to, I take it back. There's no right way to present, to have that presence that we'll get to in a little bit. But as long as you build around that in a smart way, using learning objectives, as we'll recap, and really honing in on the few tools, the few simple tools that'll help achieve what you're looking for, that's going to put you in a space where you can be nimble, be flexible to your students' needs. I don't know how many times, this is the last thing I'll say, I don't know how many times I've put together, again, this like grandiose plan of like, this is all the things I'm going to cover. And then immediately, as kind of Chris Ryan said, get punched in the mouth by my students and have to change things up the first minute. And that's okay, right? That's teaching. And I think you all know that. So build the kind of where you want to be, but create the space to make it live, to make it something that you can work around. So I don't know, that those are probably the main things I always tell teachers. Give yourself that space to be flexible.
Chris, I'm so glad that we have this chance to turn the tables on Dennis and ask him the questions sometimes, because we haven't done that enough. So thank you for doing that.
Listen, you two are the ones that make me look good in the classroom, right? And I don't want to throw too much love around so we can keep moving forward and get to our next some practical tips. But I want everyone to know that this doesn't happen on your own, right? So also looking for support, looking for opportunities to keep improving. Those are the same way you're instilling that growth mindset in your students. I want you to understand that you can always get better. This is always something that we can all learn from each other. And I it's a little cliche, but every class I teach, I learn something new about something I can do better. And I'll tell you this, I don't know how many of you have done this. I'd love to hear from you in the chat. How many of you have actually gone back and watched a lesson that you taught? Because if you haven't, it's painful. I promise you, the first time it's painful. You will not want to do it. Some of you may never do it, and that's okay too. But I will tell you, it is quite possibly one of the most valuable things you can do to continue to improve your presence, your comfort level, and just your confidence as you work in an online space. So I would just encourage all of you, if you have not done that, find an opportunity to do so, either in the future or whenever it is you feel that it could be something you could learn from, because you'll get a really, really great perspective on what your students are feeling and seeing as well.
Dennis, it's like listening to your own voice on a recording, and then it's
God.
you. It's so hard, but you're spot on. And when you're sort of like looking at it, like forgive yourself. And I'm also trying to take, if there's a meeting I'm in where it's like, oh, this is not working well. Like it could be like we didn't have the chat on or something. I think of it like I'm interested in movies and how movies are created, the narrative structure and all that. So I get fascinated by bad movies, because then I'm like, how did this go wrong? What somebody put some money into this and it went wrong. And we can kind of take that approach to even sort of bad situations in the teaching world and in education, where it's like, oh, this person, let's try to avoid it. But we have been in meetings, we've been at like whatever it is, you say, oh, I can learn something from this and take it even as a negative example, what not to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, and it doesn't have to be an entire lecture, right? Even if you want to take like a 2-minute clip, you'll immediately start picking up on things that you could do differently, or will want to do differently, or will take away from. Chris, did you want to pop in there, or?
Oh, I was just going to call your attention to Peggy's comment in the chat where she's saying, I have 55 students in my virtual class. How can I get to know them? And so actually, I was just typing a question back to you, Peggy. Do you also have them in asynchronous? Because I know tools like Flipgrid are good where you can kind of let students be creative and just introduce themselves. I'm not sure what grade level you teach, but no synchronous, just okay. So yeah, so I think having them post a little bit about themselves, that they can share publicly with okay, so sophomores in college, great, perfect. So like my first class in grad school, that was how we introduced each other. We did a little Flipgrid video or voice thread, I think maybe might have been the tool we used at the time, where we just, were able to narrate a little bit about ourselves and then put put comments back and forth, and putting faces to names is a thing. Yeah. So let them kind of be in charge of the creative narrative, and you'll get to know them in a way that if you had a more rigid assignment with specific requirements, you're not going to get as much creativity and kind of get to know what makes them tick a little bit, which is the fun part about having them in class, right? Is getting to know their different personalities. And so giving more open-ended assignment that just says, do what you want, but introduce yourself and tell us, kind of what your passion is, or, depending on your subject matters, maybe something that's also aligned with that. But I know that's how I got to know the folks that I was loosely cohorted with through grad school, and it made a big difference. My program was fully online, and never got to see their faces actually ever, other than in those videos. It was all, discussion board posts and feedback and blogs and things like that. So I know that worked pretty well for us. I'm sure Dennis and Chris have other ideas as well.
Yeah. I mean, this is what we wanted to do. So thank you for chiming in. We want to help you with those, Peggy, with the specific things that you are not looking forward to, or maybe just want a little bit more brainstorming around. And in this case, it sounds like you've got some ideas. If others have ideas, as always, feel free to type them in the chat as well. We had a blog post around tips for supporting online students outside of class, and where we talked about kind of low lift ways to get those little sparks of engagement, even though you're not there synchronously, right? So little online surveys to check in, emails with tips and advice, creating short videos of yourself. I probably talked about this like 5 times already, but there was a short video that my son's second grade teacher filmed for their class. And I just found my son playing that for himself over and over again throughout the school year, anytime he missed the in-person environment. And it was just something that kind of gave him motivation. Okay, second grader, sophomore, I know probably a big difference, but I'm sure there are some commonalities there that remain. And, along the way, something we ended that post with was support yourself, right? In other words, don't just, find that you let this online asynchronous class take over your life, but make sure you create the boundaries along the way, right? We're always gonna, as educators, feel guilty that we're not doing too much, enough, and that we could be doing more. But understand that if you create that space for students and they want to engage, whether it's via discussion boards, whatever the case, try out different things. Flipgrid is a great example, and see what sticks. It will be different for one class versus another, right? I've had one class, want to contact me via WhatsApp, and that worked really well. And one class was like, no way, there's no way I'm talking to you in any other mode than email, right? And that's fine too. So I think flexibility is key. And Peggy, if these are the questions you're asking, you're going to be just great this fall. But I'm hoping that some of these practical tips are going to be things that you can try out or think about as the planning process continues. Yeah, I don't know, Chris, Ryan, I don't know if you had anything to add there in terms of like making those connections, even though you may not be seeing them on camera.
Yeah, no, I think these are all good. And I would add to it these are all kind of like ways to get the students to you and building that link. And then I think if you do one third leg of the triangle thing at some point, where it's like, hey, introduce yourself to another, like, here could be a way. As you get the Flipgrids, like, it depends on how these are posted and shared around, but like, hey, respond to someone else's post. Like just send them a note, something you did resonated with me. We talked about this in one of the webinars around that. Just like get one little link, and we've seen that kind of thing where you're creating that community, and in some cases where we've had trial classes, people just trying out something. Anecdotally, when people start connecting to each other and they start feeling a sense of responsibility, they come back, right? When they haven't even signed up yet, they're not sure. There's a greater conversion rate when it's like, oh, I get to know someone. It's not just me and the teacher. So even though it's not the same situation exactly, I would still think about like, you can start to build the web across early on through that same kind of Flipgrid thing.
Yeah, it goes back to that being known and being seen, right? And it, which drives accountability and engagement and all of those things further down. But just the simple act of I see you and I know you and I know you said your favorite cereal is Captain Crunch, right? Like those little things actually matter because you've recalled something that they told you, and it establishes that you were invested enough to commit it to memory to say, that's the kid, right? I don't know Dennis's favorite cereal. I suspect it's not Captain Crunch, but it is pretty addictive when it's not too hard and not too soft, right? It's got to be right in the middle. It's like one of those clutch ones.
Otherwise it hurts your gums, you know?
Yeah,
It's one of my faves.
Too soft or carve you up, right? One of the two. Like technology, your friend or your enemy, but never really just functional. So Susan actually has a good
segue,
question.
by the way. Just that was good. Well done.
Thanks.
You're going to Susan's question. Nice.
I am, which is also a little tricky, right? When you are, and all of us that lived in the pre-COVID world where we worked remote, and yet our headquarters for me is in New York City. I live in Vermont, and I would join meetings in a room full of people, and there is pretty easy to feel deprioritized as a remote employee or student when other people have a relationship in the room that is different from what you have in front of your computer. And so Susan here is asking, like, I don't know how many people are going to join. I don't really know exactly what the deal is. And so that is a whole different kind of roll with it scenario. And I know there are really good, actually, I know Kaplan, some of our colleagues published a book on how to work remote successfully and how to make it feel like you're not so far away. And it can be really hard to be that person that's facilitating in a room where you're naturally feeding off the energy in the room and kind of getting that feedback. But you have to remember to go to the people that are remote and get their input as well, or it's very isolating for them. And certainly teaching, younger students for math, that's going to be kind of tricky. So I would love to hear, Chris and Dennis, what your thoughts are for her, because I know, getting the recording of the board and being sure that they, can at least see or have drop-in question and, and answer sessions, those sorts of things. That's really tricky, right? There's a lot to unpack there. So I'd just love to hear what advice you have for. I'm going to see what I can take over here.
This is the toughest one. We've powwowed, the three of us, offline about this very point. And, as we were ourselves thinking about how do we support you all and knowing it's everything out there. And we recognized from our own experiences of being remote, either permanently or at times, how hard that is to be online. And how do you create a common space when there's such an attraction, as you put it, Chris, towards like the in-person fast. A lot of it will depend on the tech setup in particular. But regardless of the tech setup, what I'd encourage is thinking you're naturally going to give space and energy to the in-person. What are ways that you can flip that at times so that the energy and everybody's attention is on the online? If, for instance, you're projecting on a board somewhere so that the action and the activity is really online. Okay, now we're going to go to our remote colleagues. Everybody type in who's on, and you could, even if people can do it, there's a way for people in the physical classroom to log in and join a conversation or a chat or something like that. And let's all create a space over here like we've been doing this, right? We're all remote, but like there's a chat space, right? That's happening, that's a little bit, it's aligned with and can happen alongside of as we're talking. That's a place where you could say, let's spend some time talking about the chat. And and we've tried to do that here. And I think that creates a nice sort of ebb and flow, as opposed to if it were just, Dennis and the Chris is in a room together, we'd be drinking coffee and like we're not physically in a room together, but it's kind of. And so it's important that we're going over to the chat and doing that consciously, because otherwise we just blah, 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 blah. I think that we can do, the thing I would think about is as you get the tech lined up and what the specifics are, there's going to be a way to spend some portion of the time over in virtual land. Like this next activity we're doing is really centered on virtual land. And if you're in person, you're sort of on the outside a little bit, but most of the time you're on the inside, like that's my thought there.
Yeah, I want to plus one that I think structurally giving the folks who are virtual the space to either participate through chat or even give them the space to participate, via their microphones, if it's possible at all, not to get too complicated here. But we do this kind of hybrid model at work a lot of the times, and there have definitely been both ends of the spectrum where one, it's like the people online are completely forgotten, and that's not a great experience, right? And on the other hand, you do also want to make sure that the two groups don't feel completely separate from each other as well. In other words, if it's difficult for the in-person folks to see what's being covered, that can also be a challenge as well. So I would say if I were to prioritize one, Susan, I wonder, and please, if you want, you can feel free to, I wonder if there's a way we can connect afterwards, if there's a way we can support you further, we'll look into that. But, we'll reach out. I guess we have your email, but it's like, if you've got an opportunity to kind of sketch out specific times within your session where you can mindfully be thoughtful about how you're engaging your class, both the in-person and the virtual, I think that you will, as Chris said, I think that will, you'll get a lot of benefit out of that. And then secondly, from like a technology perspective, I don't know if there's someone at your school who can support, but in my mind, this setup would be something like, you do a Zoom call during the session, if possible. You screen share the content you want, both in the Zoom session, but also to like a projector, if that's possible, or a screen. I don't know if that's something that you're set up for. If not, I guess we can talk more and figure that out. And then in my mind, I don't know if you're comfortable with like the Apple Pen, for example, or I don't want to get too complicated here, but like personally, I just use a tablet. I just use a regular writing tablet, a bamboo pad, that's what they call it. And I do my writing digitally. And so that writing shows up both on the screen and for my viewers virtually. So I've done that in the past in a couple different ways. Again, the prices range in terms of, and I don't know, I'm assuming how much support you have here. There are probably other ways we could we've had to do a bunch of things. Like we've had areas where that's not available at all. And Chris Ryan and I have had to brainstorm and figure out other solutions. I don't know if this is helping at all, but like, I would start with kind of the structure of how you would engage. And then I think about the technological aspects, like what the limitations will be. Notes by paper / hand, disseminating those ahead of time will be a way to alleviate some of the concern as well. It will just take a little bit more pre-work to do so, but we've done that in the past as well, kind of creating the slides and printing them out, or creating PDFs of them and sending them out via in asynchronous format. So those are anyway, we can definitely talk more about that. But okay, that's perfect. Smart notebook and doing that smart, that's fantastic, right? And I think you're definitely on that's definitely one way you could approach this. And then I would say really think about what Chris Ryan just said, which is the structure in which the engagement happens. Chris Ryan, right. you came up with.
Right. And if it goes back to, I'm gonna broken record, which is an analogy that will at some point cease to be meaningful. The broken record, like repeating oneself, like what's a record player in a record. But I'm going to repeat my call out to Chris about learning objectives. I mean, Susan, you put in about concerned about how productive it'll all be. I think that's where you take it back and you say, okay, if you're teaching through hybrid, if you have to teach in a hybrid kind of situation like this, it is totally legit. I would defend you to my dying day, like to say, all right, my learning objectives need to be therefore constrained, and I'm going to achieve them, but I'm going to choose them, and be really clear about here's what we're going to do, because it's just the throughput of material and of achievement and so forth. It's just going to be slower. Hopefully not so slow that like the wheels totally fall off the bus. The point is to like set your goals and objectives on that learning front in a really clear way. I know you're trying to balance and get it through everything, but to go back to a theme we've hit of like, choose your battles, and in particular, choose the learning objective battle really, really well.
Yeah. Yeah. I like this. And that's a great recap. I forgot to introduce teacher Katie at the top of the hour as well, but teacher Katie has been with us since the beginning as well. And thank you for that recap that you're sharing there. You can definitely take a look. We've got another scenario coming in from Patricia. As we kind of digest that, I just want to kind of, when we talked about that leaky boat, there were a couple other blog posts we had. One was around the idea of virtual clinical resources. It was a little bit more focused on clinical resources, but there were some general tips in there as well, like designating a teaching space and dressing for success. And then I think the most important one, which was the sound of silence, which came up again later in a number of different posts. But this idea that you don't have to fill the space with talking, right? I guess I'm maybe a little bit guilty of that at times, but that silence can be just as effective for learning, for digestion, for reflection, which is something I know Chris Ryan has pushed on a lot. And then actually we kind of talked about that more in Lights, Camera, Action, how to command the virtual classroom. Chris Ryan, you remember writing that? You talked about bringing presence, asking for frequent little responses, taking moments of silence, intentional pauses, varying the tone, and then of course looking warmly into the camera. What are some of the main things you'd want to rehash for sure?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of kicking it back to you, Dennis. I'm thinking about what you just, and you're modeling this too. I really appreciate how you bring that, and Chris, you do too. That, I mean, I feel present with you, right? This is a place. We have created a place here. How? Because we're authentically here, and we're trying to use the little tips and tricks of, hey, let's make sure that we comment and go out to the chat and look at, and oops, we didn't have the chat ready. Okay, let's fix that. Those kinds of things. That's really it. You hit the nail on the head when I think you said about the authenticity, and and I'm gonna broken record on my broken record, and Chris, I feel like I so love. I'm just gonna repeat myself again. You got me on the learning objectives wagon, and it's transformational. And I know that it's kind of like, it's the same, like, keep focusing on what that end goal is. Here, one of the end goals really is, it might not be a learning objective per se, but is, let's create presence. Okay, then what do you do to do it?
Yeah. I would say just the idea of presence. Maybe the way I'd sum it up is listen, and not just with your ears, but when you are teaching, look for reasons why you might pivot or adjust or change something, and I think your audience will appreciate it, meaning they won't feel like they're watching a video. They're watching a teacher in action. I think that is a really important just that's something you've got to practice, because it doesn't happen right away. I remember the first few classes I taught, it almost felt like I was in a room by myself, and that's the wrong way to think about it. But it's almost like you're so honed in on what you need to accomplish that you don't see or hear or respond to anything. You just go. And I don't know if any of you have had that experience, and time flies too. But you have to take those moments to say, okay, how are folks responding? I want to be able to interact. I want to be able to respond in the same way that I would in the live classroom. And so definitely keep that in mind. And then Chris Murner, back to you. And before we do that though, I do want to highlight Patricia's I love that acronym. Form is great. I could use that for myself too. I have a hard time starting conversations on a regular basis. So I will remember that, right? F for family, including pets, O for occupation, R for recreation. And what was M for? I don't see the more. Is that you know, is M for the message? Is that for, oh, message? Okay, perfect. Okay, thanks, Patricia. Helpful. Thank you. And then that's good to know. And then our blog kind of shifted a little bit. We started we entered a phase where we were kind of responding to all of you, and we started patching the boat a bit, meaning you all got thrown into it. It was messy, but it happened. But you wanted to be better. And so we started writing a series of posts with Chris Murner leading the way, where we talked about online learning doesn't have to be less, where we talked about time management, the idea of a flipped classroom, involving your students, helping them get creative, how it's ideally suited for sharing and feedback, and how you can surprise your students. Like, what hobbies can you leverage? How do you, it brings some of yourself into it. I know we talked about that a little bit already, but we kind of were reiterating that. Chris Murray, anything you remember particularly from that post fondly that
Yeah, I think last year, one of the benefits, if there is one, to having COVID shut everything down was that it happened in the spring. So there was a pre-existent relationship that you had with your students. This fall, it's different, right, for many people, because the students you're going to be seeing or are seeing now are new. And I think, in the spring, you were sort of a safe harbor for that leaky boat for your students, right? Because they trusted you and you took this journey together. And I think, there was at least that you could hang on to as an educator. It's like, I know my students, I know my learners, we're going to get this thing across the finish line, into harbor, whatever, if we're going to mix metaphors. But really working towards a goal commonly where they trusted you. And this fall, you have to reestablish that relationship. And so I think, not to make you feel less confident in that, you're still the same educator with the same passion that you had last spring. It's a new batch of students, it's a new set of challenges, but you're not the same person you were 8 months ago, right? You have learned a lot, and you've changed your teaching styles to reflect what this has thrown at you. And so I think many of the takeaways are still the same, right? Being authentic, being real. And so that blog was a little bit about being creative in your space. Where can you go in your house to show them who you are, and still, let them be a little surprised. You're still together, and so you're still trying to show them how you can learn in a way that may not feel the same, although is becoming increasingly more familiar, frankly. Right, this is not the first rodeo now, and so how do you step up your game a little bit? Just like we did in those early days, to say, well, okay, so now I got everybody on camera. What do I do with them now? Or what's something creative I can do? And I'm not in the chemistry lab. What can I use at home to still show them some science? Or what can they find? Or what do they have access to? And kind of just really being creative and still safe, and recognizing that not all students are comfortable showing their living situations, but still being supportive of where they are, and still seeing them for who they are and letting them be creative. So I think many of those lessons are still the same. We're just kind of further down the path.
Makes a lot of sense. In fact, I want to direct quote you. Towards the end of that post, you talked about life isn't business as usual, so learning can't be either. And then you said, but just because it isn't a typical school year doesn't mean it has to be inferior. Leverage what you have for online tools. Don't rush to add new things or complexity. The most important thing to your students right now is you. The encouragement of my teacher and the support of my friends helped set my identity as a curious science kid, something I've yet to outgrow. Well, maybe the kid part. You are the best person to take this journey with your students, and your students will ground you too. We will all learn together. And I was kind of rereading through all our posts, and that was the kickoff for our Patching the Boat series. Next, we had teacher Katie, who, well, maybe I should be calling you Dr. Katie, since Katie does have her PhD, but she wrote a great post about tips for keeping distracted students engaged in the online classroom, how we need to be interactive, use visual aids, maintain structure and expectations, post assignments with clear due dates and times in one easy place to find. Anyway, there was a lot here in terms of finding ways to encourage, connect, and keep students in the game. And if any of these things are things that maybe you didn't think about recently, go back, go do a little quick Google search. I'm proud to say, actually, when we first started this and I typed in digital classroom resources into Google, I couldn't find our page until like the fourth or fifth page, but now we're number one. And that's probably thanks to you and for your engagement and for your participation. So thank you to all of you for continuing to stay with us throughout all this, and we'll be back. This is not a goodbye. Let me be clear, right? Like, maybe it sounds a little like farewell-y, but this is more of a, hey, we are nearing the end of summer. It's time to figure out, how do we support you anew? How do we pivot? How do we change the way we are helping you get to where you need to be? So then we moved on to measuring learning in an online world, assessments. If that's something you want to think about, we had some ways where we had some tips there. Then we had one of our favorite webinars with a special guest, Chris Williams, where we talked about reaching the disengaged, addressing the needs of struggling students. And we talked about different ways we can, just support students who kind of drop off the radar, which I know we experienced in the spring, and I'm sure we'll experience in the fall. And definitely one of the takeaways was engaging parents as much as we could, or others, to keep the accountability, even at the college level. We had things about cognitive load, 8 tips to manage cognitive load, pro tips to mastering lesson planning, and then finishing well, transitioning, reflecting, planning, all that. I mean, there was a lot there. Chris Murner, any things that come to mind from, man, again, like we talked about a lot. For me, it always comes back to that acronym that I remember from you, Chris, and I take away form with me from Patricia. But from you, I've always had KISS, right? Which is keep it simple, stupid. Can we rehash that for the audience a bit, just in case anyone needs bearing or reminding?
That just, you can do what, 80%, and 80% is a kind of made up number, but just like whatever you think you're going to accomplish, instead of trying, it's 80-20. Like, if you're, the more conscious you are about that, going in, I'm broken recording on my broken record. Like, the more you know what you really, by the end of the hour, the end of the session, what is going to constitute success for you, and even more importantly for your students, and not just they were exposed to, but I'm thinking of your verbs, Chris, in the learning objectives. What can they now do? What have they done and demonstrated? That's learning, right? And you can plant seeds and all that sort of thing, but what would you say, like, okay, strip this thing back? I'm thinking of, in terms of Chris Williams is talking about reaching students who cannot be close. That's happening now among our campuses as they're closing down. I live next door to Chapel Hill, and UNC is one of the famous cases of, well, they're closing, going all online. Students are in limbo and flux and chaos and all the rest. I mean, even at that level, there's going to be, hey, what do I have to do to reach out, and enlist your colleagues to help identify those, because otherwise we're gonna lose people, and that's whether it's pre-K on up, and so I'll kick it over to you, Chris.
I think one of the powerful things, I love the fact that Chris Williams often referred to educators as putting on their superhero capes, and going in with the students. And we talked about the value of physical mail, of having something tangible. And there really is something still so special about getting a note in the mail versus an email. My daughter received that from her homeroom teacher, her 8th grade homeroom teacher. They didn't get to have their 8th grade graduation the way that, so many students did this year. And he sent a really nice note to each of them saying what he really admired about all of them, and was looking forward to seeing that in them as they pursue their high school career, and then asked them to reflect on who they were now and what their hopes were. And they had to turn it in at graduation to him. And he gives them back to them when they graduate high school 4 years from now. And I think that's a super cool kind of bookendy thing that he's been doing for years, but felt somewhat more special now because they didn't get that nice closure where that was probably just another thing in a stack of things that he would have done as an educator. But now it became like the focal point was, her writing by hand this really kind of reflective assignment and turning it into him. And he handed her, a note, and then followed up with a note after having read her note later in the mail this summer. And so I think, that continuity and that I see you, even if I don't see you, especially in asynchronous classes, can be really valuable. And I think it is the relationship part of being a teacher that has suffered the most, that we heard from educators early on in these webinars, and has been continually, brought up in chat and, with different interactions we've had, that, the part of teaching that I love the most was being with my students. I didn't go into this to become an online teacher. There are those teachers, and that's cool. But that is not what the majority of educators in this country have done for their careers. And I see, now Peggy's asking here, which is just to all panelists, go ahead and change your chat to all panelists and attendees so everybody can benefit from all of your wisdom. Peggy said, helping students stay on track due to lack of self-motivation. Absolutely. I will confess that as a longtime educator, longtime education professional, I pulled my student, my son, out of his hybrid model and put him in a structured online program because he just couldn't do it. Like, he couldn't stay on top of it. He always thought he was better off than he was. He didn't have the wherewithal to go check all of the things. I don't really know exactly what the deal was, except that it was not productive for our family. And so we've enrolled him in a much more structured online program where I'm hoping he will be much more successful and feel more confident, because to always feel like you're doing better than you are is a terrible thing when reality hits. So I'm excited about that, but I really understand that that's a problem. I've seen it firsthand, and how discouraging it is for the student too, right? He told me this spring, like, I don't feel smart. Like, that's ridiculous to me. My son is brilliant. As most parents will say about their kids, my son is, but he just needs more structure. And so I think, to the degree that you can be concrete and over communicate, in the online classroom, you absolutely have to say it more than you think you do in person, right? Because, in the in-person classroom, you get that, like, eyes up, on me, you got this, all right, we cool. And you can tell who's cool and who's not, right? Online, that's not the way it goes. I think, working from home, we've mastered that even a little bit in meetings. We're like, yeah, we're good. Can we just get off this call, right? Your students are doing the same thing. So put it in an online announcement, send it in an email, put it in the Remind app if they use that, or whatever you're using in your school. Like, over communicate your deadlines, over communicate their expectations, make your rubrics really easy to find and the expectations so obvious that there's no way they could come back and say, well, I didn't know I needed to do that, right? It's going to make your job easier too, to over post. I mean, and make it not annoying, but like, so that it's in multiple places, because you also don't know how students are navigating to find your core stuff. I sat with my daughter and watched how she got through Google Classroom, watched how my son did completely different pathways to get to stuff. So just because you navigate that way, when you look at student view, you built it. So you know where your stuff is, they don't. So putting it in multiple places and redundancy will never be a problem in terms of keeping students informed. You can always say, look, it's here, 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 and here. You can also go ahead and do the cheap version, right? Which is sticking it in a PowerPoint slide and having it in the homeroom when they come to synchronous session. It's on the screen. Share your screen and, like, here's what's due Friday, right? All of those things help students remind themselves that this is coming up. This is coming up. She's aware it's coming up. I'm going to get graded on this. I better do it.
I love that. I'd like, flood the zone with the message, and you keep the messages very, very, like, what is the next thing? What are the most important things? As opposed to sharing everything about the whole semester, et cetera. It's like, what's the next thing that you gotta focus me on? And I just want to call out, Susan, I love what that you've been sending a birthday message, and that's fantastic. That, you've reached them, and then the rest follows, and that's what they're going to remember. That's what's going to then lead to short-term as well as long-term gains. And Katie, as you put it, like, this gives us like, the normal times, everyone knows it's not normal times. And it sort of gives us a way. I mean, I remember being in New York City. I was living there in the aftermath of 9/11. sort of everyone had this, you got into an elevator then, such as people actually did, and or down the hall or something. And there was always, you could talk about, there was this thing, it was awful and tragic, but it meant that, well, and it maybe, and you don't have to get political and shouldn't and all these things. It's rather that like everybody's facing tough times right now. So that gives us an opportunity to address it and to do so authentically, when sometimes in normal times we don't do that, or we take it for granted, or it would be weirder. We can go ahead and be goofier and sort of like cornier now.
We're always corny.
I now take that back, as you both react and you're like, how can you be cornier than you already are? Never mind.
No, but yeah, and what Patricia wrote, it reminds me of something that I've heard a couple of times already this week, is compassion over content. That's come up a couple of times, and I think that's a really good thing to just keep in mind, and not just compassion for your students, but to Chris's point, for yourself as well, because we kind of, in the next two blog posts, and these were actually two of my favorites, and they were all my favorites, but these were two of my favorites. We talked about self-care, and teacher Katie talked about battling burnout amidst uncertainty. And then we brought on a special guest, and maybe the theme is we got to bring more guests on, but we had Kimberly Strafford from Worry Woos join us to talk about how to hold your fire and avoid burnout, and walked us through some great breathing exercises and gave us some real practical tips on how to stay in the game. So if those are things that you're worried about, those posts may be interesting to you, and I hope you'll share them around and give us feedback. And then with 9 minutes to go, we took this summer to take the time to really engineer our courses for success. And we this is where I keep the boat analogy going, and we made a new seaworthy boat with a new course, and we talked about learning objectives, something that Chris Ryan already touched upon, but I think it's worth, Chris Murner, hearing it from you as well. Like, what are learning objectives? Why do we need to keep them near and dear?
I really feel like when I started on the learning science team, I became like the learning objective police, right? It's it's so important, because you want to be driving towards a goal with the end in mind, so that you make sure that you're spending time on the things that matter most. And we talked about how online learning, you really have to carve out the stuff that matters most, because you can't always get through all of the content you could get in person, where you have those quick cues to know your pacing. It takes a little longer. So learning objectives, and really being sure they scaffold up, to the end goal of the course, so that they're ready for the next professor, or so they're ready to move to the next grade, or whatever your overall course goals are. Really taking those back into measurable, teachable, and measurable outcomes is so key, and it makes your life so much easier to spend the time up front. A lot of times they tie to state standards, if you're teaching in a K-12 environment, but they certainly are something that you have the ability to kind of dial in. When you do it right, you write the learning objectives first, you write your assessments, they almost write themselves, which is the beauty of writing a great learning objective. If you say you have to be able to solve for variable by isolating X, which is, off the top of my head and terrible. But if you have to be able to solve, that's your action verb, right? Then you just ask them simply to solve, to be sure that they can do that, right? So it makes that kind of a one-to-one trade much easier. And if you go back and you look at the assessment blog that our colleague Laura Kean wrote, she'll give you some tips on how to be sure you're covering off and being sure that they really have mastered those learning objectives to a degree, and that they're ready to move on to more. And I think, really taking it sort of one bite at a time is our best bet this school year anyway, right? We can't get too far ahead of ourselves. We don't know what the climate looks like with virus and state by state and county by county and then school by school. It's definitely a changeable kind of environment, but going back to the analogy, if the boat is truly seaworthy, it's going to withstand it much better than it did in the spring, where it wasn't built for online, right? If you've done your due diligence and you've kind of double built your class a little bit so that it's ready for online, because you're being asked to do so much more of a lift, it'll be able to pivot easier over into that lane in a much much easier way, at least from a curriculum standpoint. You're still going to have to be resilient and roll with it, but hopefully having really thought about the curriculum in a way that's very modular and, structuring those activities around what async versus synchronous does well is going to pay dividends throughout the school year.
Love that. Love that. And then we talked about how to apply instructional design, how and when to use synchronous sessions for greatest impact. And then, of course, today, with 5 minutes to go, we've got time for some final words before we'll be back. We'll be back, but the fall will be different. It'll be the same. And in true Avengers fashion, I do want to take this opportunity to wish our very own Chris Ryan farewell as well. Chris Ryan will be leaving Kaplan at the end of the month to start his own venture in education. And so we're really excited for him. And Chris, you have to promise us you'll be back as a guest, because we will dearly miss you and we will need you back.
Got it. You You can't keep me away from this place. So
no, we will have to just bring you on we'll just have to bring you on every episode. Maybe that's what it is. Just have you have a guest on every episode.
We're just not nearly as good with one Chris as we are with two. So it's not fair. So you have to come back.
All right. So 4 minutes left though. Let's get some final words for our educators as they go into their next semester. And some who have already done so, but who wants to start? Chris Murner, you want to give some final words?
I'll start because I just about said it all already. I think you guys need to give yourself credit for being resilient and for having done really well with not much leeway or help this spring, right? Just a lot of tossed in the deep end. This fall, is whatever it looks like for you on your campus and with your students, is going to be better. And you feel like you're starting over, but you're not, because you're starting from a place of experience. And we look forward to continuing the conversation with you. I'm going to give Chris all the time.
Yeah, Chris Ryan, come on.
I'm going to miss you all, everyone here. And thank you all so much. This has been transformative for me personally, not to put too much of and I'm not going to try to do the extra corny, just regular corny for the chips right now. But it has been really, really great. And I'm thinking of the videos, Chris, that you the interviews that you did with a number of teachers. And I don't teach first graders, right? But I have one right now. And regardless, like what stuck with me as I thought back on that is how one of the people that you talked with said how her heart hurt to be away from her students. And in a way, we're all still feeling that. Let's just go ahead. It doesn't matter what age. Our hearts hurt being away from our students. So let's just bring ourselves to our classes and they'll be there through, we didn't have our chat enabled. Is that really, like, we fixed it? We just fixed the things and we keep going. So hang in there, everyone. And I'll see you on the creature trail, like the wild krats say. And I can't wait to be back as a guest. Thank you, everyone, Tricia and Susan and Katie and Dan and Chris and Dennis. You all are close to my heart.
Yeah. Well, thank you all again. It is 3:58 p.m. It sounds like, I don't know if we can do more than that. And I just want to thank you all for always engaging, joining us. I hope we were able to help. Let us know how we can support. We am planning the fall now, but we know we have to respond to whatever it is, the challenges that we face. And so we hope to keep sharing, and we hope to keep hearing from you. And yeah, thank you, Susan. It's been great to have you along for the ride, Patricia as well, and Becky and all of you. It's been I feel blessed to have this forum and to be able to, with the two Chris's, just share some of the things we've learned over the years we've done this. So we look forward to seeing you all again soon. So best of luck in your final planning, and everything that you're still working through, I'm sure. Just remember, there is no right answer. Just be there for your students. And this is Dennis and the Chris's signing off. I'm sure we'll see you soon. So a great rest of your summer, and we'll talk to you soon.